And it's that time of year again. It's retail's festive game of chicken. We've seen Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Sales, customer behaviour, margin pressure, staff pressure, and patterns that keep repeating every year. I'm going to look at what works, what doesn't, and how to survive this festive frenzy without losing your brand or your sanity. So let's set the scene and have a look at some of the early insights. Black Friday and Cyber Monday are behind us, and the early signals are
Retail reckoning, no space for dusty shelves, 'cause retail reckoning owns the floor.
The early signals are as messy as expected and also as telling. Cutting to the chase, shoppers did spend big, but potentially not that wisely. And maybe the discounts weren't as good as promised. UK consumers poured £3.8 billion in online spend over just the 4-day weekend. That's up 4 to 5% on last year. And the categories such as jewellery, electronics, clothing and cosmetics were the ones that did the best. Out in the high street, it was a bit of a different story because footfall was mixed. Some only saw a modest weekend uplift, but peak Black Friday itself dipped slightly year on year. Then we've got to add to that, as always, consumer watchdog Which had flagged that many discounts weren't really that good at all. And shockingly, of the John Lewis products that they were tracking, 94% of those were the same price or cheaper at other times of the year. And the online retailer Very, they didn't do much better. Apparently 93% of their deals weren't any cheaper than they could have been before. This leads to some discomfort. Shoppers hunting out the bargains might have ended up paying more than if they'd perhaps planned ahead. And so this is the new reality, and this is why I call it retailer's game of chicken, because an eye-catching sale doesn't always equate to real value, and that's what savvy customers are noticing. So what does this really tell us? Shoppers undoubtedly are more savvy, more cautious, and more sceptical about what constitutes real value and if a deal is a deal. Whilst discounts do drive traffic, it does so whilst margins are pressurised, and also, if they're not as good as they could be, brand trust can take a real hit. The winners are those who understand both consumer behaviour and context, not just those who can do the biggest discounts. I'm going to have a look into what these numbers really mean for UK retailers this Christmas to try to spot some early winners and losers. And also, what can we learn from this chaos without losing your brand, your margin or your sanity? So the early take, well, again, as mentioned, the winners were definitely jewellery, electronics, clothing and cosmetics. They were driving the online spend, and they've performed strongest over the Black Friday and Cyber Monday weekend. Both have benefited from genuine deals and higher shopper interest. What we do have to remember, though, is it isn't just the weekend. Some retailers ran Black Month, Black Week, and so they were spreading out the demand across a much longer period of time. And I can say I've been receiving emails from every man and his dog promoting the next best Black Friday deal and the next best when it's gone offer for ages, it seems. The other winners, those with smart omnichannel strategies, but you could say that all year round. If you've got a solid online click and collect and store experience, they're basically delivering the service that people want, and they don't have to rely on deep discounts. It just makes it more convenient. But I'd say that all year round anyway. Nonetheless, they did see a solid increase in the Black Friday Cyber Monday period. There's a couple of, I wouldn't go as far as to say losers, but red flags, caution flags. Obviously, it's surprising. I really was shocked when John Lewis and Very were hitting the headlines for their questionable discounts. And it's a real reminder that price doesn't just build trust, because shoppers spot things. And those deals that aren't deals, especially when they're headline making, that damages brand credibility. And for a brand like John Lewis, that's really sad. Then we saw a lot of deep discounting in other sectors like fashion and electricals. And that may have driven up number of transactions, but it's already eating into already eroded margins. And is it going to really benefit them in terms of what happens after Christmas and Boxing Day sales? Will it have eaten up appetite for buying stuff in the sale when they've already effectively had it? Footfall on the peak day was patchy. It really stood to show that even the big chains can't completely predict or control shopper behaviour when customers are looking for value and they're timing their spending. So I guess the takeaway is it's not who cuts the deepest, it's about who's going to actually bring a balance of value, experience and trust, because it is so important when shoppers have got access to so much data and information to make sure that a deal is a deal, because shoppers notice when it isn't real. And that lesson matters more than a single weekend spike in sales, because it may mean they don't come back. I mean, this sets the stage for a bit of a deeper look now, from consumer psychology to margin management, staff and operations, so that you can spot the patterns that really matter for hopefully the rest of the season and beyond. So how did we get here? Well, we have to accept that we created this monster. Black Friday used to be a single day. Cyber Monday was just the digital extension, usually the first Monday in December after payday, when people had maybe been browsing for what they might like to buy for Christmas, and so they then shopped online. And that was because as well, they did want to make sure that they got in within the delivery windows. Pre-COVID, Christmas promotions did kick off in late November. But last year, data from the British Retail Consortium and MRI showed that promotions were starting potentially up to 3 weeks earlier, and discounts between 22 and 25%. My take is that customers are not being difficult when they wait for a deal. They're behaving exactly as an industry we've trained them to behave. And the game of chicken again. Shoppers are holding out for deals, checking prices, and they're sceptical about value, because the fact is, if you can sell something for such a large discount for X period of the year, they've got to ask you, well, why can't you give me a better price all year round? I mean, I completely can understand why that would be what people might think. So the game is getting tougher for retailers who do rely on deep discounting. The other thing to bear in mind is that spending at this time of year isn't really rational. It's emotional, and we see panic buying and some fairly questionable choices. MRI data shows that the footfall spikes and last-minute buying aren't anomalies. It happens year in, year out. But we don't know exactly when. And there's also a layer of uncertainty in consumer confidence this year. We've had a tricky budget, things are looking a little bit challenging for a lot of people. So we may see more cautious and more calculated buying alongside the usual panic-driven frenzy. The Which findings tie into this. So whilst customers are emotional, they're increasingly critical. They want reassurance that a deal is real. And if you don't provide that reassurance and the transparency, what would be an emotional spike in sales can turn into frustration and people becoming questioning of your brand, and it hits your brand trust. Then we've got to remember that every early discount eats into margin and brand authority, and margin is hard to come by. The prices of things have gone up. Retailers are trying to absorb the cost of their own supply chain increases, not having to pass on the expense to their shopper, and it's difficult. BRC figures are showing that operating margins have halved from 6% in 2018 to 3% in 2024. That's very low. And early Black Friday promotions, for example, it gives us a short-term boost in sales, but it risks long-term damage. And essentially, if customers believe that waiting equals saving, then the sense of urgency and value just evaporates, and they sit back and they wait. The other problem, as we've touched on, flashy deals that aren't genuine are going to erode trust, push margins down, and people will start to shop more selectively. We're also in a position where, we're actually seeing a national campaign by the Retail Trust to encourage customers to respect retail employees. That's a sad fact. And there's a staff squeeze. People don't want to work for retail in the way that perhaps it might have been seen as a handy part-time job with flexible hours in the past. And it's driven by the fact that the behaviour towards people who work in retail has become very challenging. I don't know what has created this shift, but there's a lot more abuse and aggressive behaviour from customers to retail staff. Hence, it's really difficult to hire people, and seasonal hiring fell by nearly 15% year on year in 2024. So what you've got is a stretched, stressed out team on the shop floor, which leads the retailer to lost sales, poor customer experience, and potentially lost trust. The difficulty is your people are your brand. They need to be empowered, and the customers will feel it if they're happy and valued. But if they feel ignored, the retailer pays the price. The difficulty is they also need to feel safe, and that is becoming an increasing concern. So even if a promotional activity like Black Friday does lift online spend, without the proper trained staff who feel safe and happy at work, able to deliver the experience, it's more or less a wasted opportunity. So what do we do to break the cycle? Well, I think the thing is we've got to stop playing chicken. It's not a we'll break into sale when we absolutely have to, because the customers are sitting waiting for you to do that. We need to surprise our customers with value, not just markdowns, creating moments of joy, training the team to sell product by telling stories, not just by showing prices. And you need to protect your brand with appropriate and time-bound discounts. End of season, end of life, new product coming out. Those kind of sensible and relatable discounts that hold integrity. If it's a discount for a discount's sake, it can make people cynical. And again, the witch findings are making this lesson clear. Authentic value is going to trump eye candy discounts. And that's where a clever pricing and promotional strategy beats just random markdowns for the sake of it. The other aspect is the operational reality, whereby customers do expect things to be a lot more seamless and a lot more integrated. Click and collect and online fulfillment is great until it doesn't work. In 2023, 40% of shoppers used click and collect, but a third reported they experienced delays. I think you'd be better off having one empowered colleague solving problems at the store. It's far more value-adding to the business than 10 discount codes that drove the traffic in the first place. Early Black Friday 25, the reports are suggesting that operational failures are still an issue. This to me reinforces that service and reliability is going to always outperform pure discounting. So really, to sum up, Black Friday and Cyber Monday are entertaining, but I'm not convinced anybody really wins. Shoppers are getting a deal, but they're losing out on the joy and the experience. Retailers get the sale, but they're giving away margin, and staff are faced with the fallout. People fighting over TVs was one of the things I remember from Black Friday several years ago, and it hasn't really got any better. I mean, yes, the early insights say online spend hit 3.8 billion, and we've seen that the categories that perform best are the sort of gifting and personal care type stuff. But with discounts at 16 to 17%, margins are squeezed, footfall patchy. Shoppers are getting more and more savvy, more and more cautious, and more sceptical about real value. And again, to see John Lewis hitting the headlines for questionable discounts, I mean, that undermines probably one of the most trusted retail brands that we have in the country. So this Christmas, price with purpose. Train people to deliver excellent service and experience. And remember, these early insights are just the start. We're going to know a lot more as the season unfolds and what the budget's impact will have been on consumer confidence. I'm Claire Bailey, the Retail Champion, and this has been Retail Reckoning.
Yeah, retail reckoning. Retail reckoning. No space for dusty